Welcome to another episode of Unconditioned Mind. Unconditioned Mind is a project of Awakened Global, which is an initiative that seeks to contribute towards gender and racial inequality. In this season, we're doing a leadership series. I'm really excited about it. We're interviewing seasoned leaders on the big issues that affect us as a people and as a nation and continent. I have an exciting guest for you today, Advocate Mojanku Gumbi, who needs no introduction, a really great friend of mine, and I know that we're going to have an excellent conversation. Maybe you can start by just introducing yourself, tell us where you are briefly, and then we'll delve into the interview.
Well, thank you very much, Nonku, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure just to sit with friends and talk. And I hope that's what we are going to do today. Really, the way I introduce myself, I always say to people, I'm Mojanku Gumbi from Tavanju. That's all. That's the essence of it, because people like this, Advocate Gumbi, did this and that. I'm like, no, I'm always just Mojanku Gumbi from Tavanju, from the village. And I still go back to the village. And I happened to have had the privilege of working for important people. I'm not the one who's important. I was working for important people. And I work for another important one at this stage as an advisor to the Secretary General of the UN. So that's all there is to it. Just a young woman from the village.
Wow. Yeah. Anyway, I know your humility. But this podcast is, to encourage young people who are still trying to find their way in the world, and they look up to us, and they don't appreciate that life is a journey, we go through ups and downs as well as these powerful people that you see. So maybe you can just share your amazing career, some of the, the highlights of that career, so that people can learn something from your own experience. Whatever you want to share.
In many ways, I think that, I come from, both my father and my mother were teachers. And my father was one of the first graduates at Fort Hare. So in a way, education was always important, but my grandfather also, my grandfather was what today maybe you may call, at some stage he was one of the first treasurer generals of the ANC. He was at the founding of the ANC. I've never been a member of the ANC. That's my grandfather. But education, I'm saying that to say education was very important to them. So I grew up in Tavanju and went to primary school and high school there. So the first time I left the village was to go to university. But what I always say, the reason I give this background around education is that around me, there were many other students who were, we were told we were intelligent, who were just as intelligent. You would have experienced the same, who you used to compete for number one and number two, number three, right through your schooling. They knew that if number one goes to this one, the other one will be 2 and 3 and all of that, right up to matric. So the fact that some of us had the opportunity that we had, after they went to university and got involved in student politics, Black consciousness student politics then, because I finished high school in 1976 and we had marched before, and I was taken in for questioning, and so the school closed the whole of the second semester. So by the time I got to Tefloop in 1977, I was already sort of active as a young person. But the fact that that path was carved out for me, or I had the privilege of going into that, a child of Steve Biko, because that was Saso's strength at Tefloop, the conscientization that happened there, then going to Wits to do my LLB, it could have been anyone. That's the point I'm making. It could have been anyone. And when I go back home now, I see those ones that I was in standard 1 with, sub A with, standard 3, who never had the opportunity to leave Tabanj. But I know that they were just as intelligent as I am. So I always reflect on that to say, you shouldn't think you are special. It could have been any one of us who was at the right place at the right time in that village, because they were just as intelligent as I was. And even better, some of them better. And both boys and girls, I still remember their names. And I still see them when I go home. So I really came out of that, as I say, into TEF in its heydays, with states of emergencies, with the army came to the campus to surround us. We used to throw stones at the soldiers and everything, the days where we slept on the mountain because the police were harassing everyone. Some of the people that we got to know who left for exile while we were at school. And then coming from that environment of Tefloop, where we were really just activists, all of us, and we had each other support, coming to Wits. And then when I got to Wits, for instance, in the law faculty, there was this thing that automatically they think all black students needed some extra lessons or things like that. And we were like, what? As if you are not as intelligent. I remember the dean of the law school was Louis Tager then. And we defied that. And we did so well at Wits, black students, many. And that's the only place where I've ever attended, academic prize giving ceremonies. Because, those days we used to reject those. We didn't want to go to graduations. We didn't, it was the boycott years. But just to show them that we are activists, we are not stupid, we would attend all those prize-giving ceremonies. One anecdote is that at Wits, I did one course which was usually done by the final years because it was a 2-year LLB because I already had a degree. So I did like forensic medicine and practical legal studies where we worked as lawyers at the Legal Resources Center.
Okay.
So I did that. Mrs. Felicia Kentridge was my supervisor, Sydney Kentridge's wife. And I got the prize for that. But one of the students was Tony Leon, and they were all a year ahead of me. But I did that a year earlier, and I got the prize for that. So, we attended. I'm just mentioning it to say we attended those prize giving to say to these white people, of course, we are just as intelligent, if not more, than you are. So Wits was a really, coming out of just that solidarity and camaraderie and comradeship of Tefloop, to walk into Wits and be told that you're not as intelligent as we are. And it was quite an experience. But anyway, there were lots of colleagues there. Pensi Tlakula, Kumotso Moroka was ahead of us. Nomondem Ngibisa, many others. Precious Moloi Mutsepe, was always hanging out with us. All of us were there. Yeah.
Okay. And then you started your career?
So I finished at Wits I went back to Polokwane. I'm from Tabanchu in the Free State, but I went to Polokwane to do the training as an attorney, because the one of the law firms there was headed by Don Kadimeng, an excellent lawyer, but also a black consciousness activist. So that was wonderful. I did my articles in Polokwane and then qualified as an attorney. Those were the heydays, of political activism. And there we represented all parties, because as lawyers, it was the biggest black law firm. It was all black.
Okay.
In Polokwane. And we represented all this. Some of them I meet today. The former premier of Limpopo, Sello Molot, says to me, we were clip hoyers. We used to call them throwing stones. So he says, we are told we have a lawyer. Because, the police used to just arrest students en masse. And then the South African Council of Churches would instruct us to go and appear for them. So he says, we come out from the cells, into the court, we are told we have a lawyer. When we get there, we find this very tiny woman, and they say she's our lawyer. We're like, what can she do? And then lo and behold, she got us out. She was so fiery and feisty. So got into Polokwane at the height of the 80s, because I finished at Wits 1983. So it was 84, 85, 86 was really, we ran across one of the people who was killed, just like Steve Biko, Makompo Kutumelo was killed by the police, was my client. And I did that case with Tikang, and the police wouldn't let us see the body, wouldn't let us, the whole thing just like Biko. But finally, as I put my foot down as an attorney, they had beaten him. And he died in the cells with some of his comrades who were arrested. They could see this man is dying.
Sure.
They screamed the whole night, and the police only came in the morning and he was dead. So those are some of the cases that stand out that I dealt with in Polokwane as an attorney. But really, I must tell, the person who is responsible for who I am as a lawyer is that man, Donald Nkadime. Very, very wise man. We buried him last year, unfortunately. And I don't like to talk about anecdote. He used to say, when people come for small things like defamation, like 2 teachers fought at school, ladies. And he says to you, want me to sue the other one for defamation? It's going to take 3 years, and you'll be standing in a cold court to say, yes, she said this to me, she said this. And it's not. So he says, just go and stand across the fence and swear back at her. That's justice. You'll feel better that when she said this and this is just good. He was also that personal. He was just an ordinary human being, but a brilliant, brilliant mind, and really shaped the lawyer that I am today.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And maybe you can share just about your experience and, when you were advising President Thabo Mbeki. Let's just get some nuggets there.
Well, first of all, I didn't know him. After being a lawyer, I came to Joburg. I worked for the Black Lawyers Association. And it is from there that Dikgang Moseneke said to me, I must come to the IEC. So at the IEC, I was one of the 3 top executives. The other 2 were white males. So it's when I'm at the IEC that Sydney Mufamadi comes to say, President Mbeki or Mr. Thabo Mbeki wants to see you about working with him. So I'm like, I don't even know him. The person I had worked with by then was his wife.
Oh.
Sizanele Mbeki. She came back from exile, and she went and found me at the BLA when she started Women's Development Bank. And she asked me to serve on the board, and I agreed. And I had never met Thabo Mbeki.
Oh, wow.
Until maybe a week before they were sworn in. I had gone to Lusaka. I don't belong to the ANC. I'm in the Black Consciousness movement. So we had gone to Lusaka from time to time. We had met Madiba several times when he was persuading Azapo to come into the negotiations. And I had met Bontatenzo, Bomaduna, and all of that. But in those meetings, I had never met Thabo Mbeki, ever.
Oh, wow.
So I saw him for the first time, let's say a week before inauguration. And he told me that he would like me to come in. The main thing was that the office did not exist before, of a president and 2 deputies, because it was Madiba and then Thabo Mbeki and F.W. de Klerk as deputies. So we had to formulate the structure. Mm-hmm. And I was working with Isopa hard to do that. So, but I hope that we worked well together. He always knew that we were young, all of us. And he didn't use those words, but basically he said to us, I know that I'm taking a chance on young people. Mojanku, you're not the most senior lawyer in South Africa. Mosungwasheng, you're not the most senior economist here, none of you. And you're going to make mistakes. But I think I have shoulders broad enough to carry your mistakes, because I would really like the next generation of leaders. So that from the beginning, that was really reassuring to have in that senior office, to have a principal who says, it's okay sometimes to make a mistake, just don't make a big one. So that allowed us to do many things. And I was in Lesotho recently. He was giving a lecture just 4 days ago. And I met all the senior people in Lesotho, because the first time Lesotho had a problem when there was a government in South Africa, he sent me. And I went alone the first time to go and just find out what is going on. The whole country was shut down. People were in the streets, and it was very, very tense. And I kept saying to him, what if something breaks down and I'm there? He says, no, we'll come, we'll evacuate you if there's problem. So there's just the confidence that it gave you. And he used to say to me, don't listen to everything. That the one thing that I learned from him is not to prejudge people or situations. He would say to us, if you read so much, let's say about Zimbabwe or Cote d'Ivoire or Congo, and they tell you, Nonkululeko goes around at night killing people, and this one's wife has got a secret cell. He says it will affect your own political judgment. So you need to go out there and listen with an open mind, because sometimes even people that you think are wrong have got something to say, and they are complaining about something genuine. They may just not be expressing it properly. So go out there and listen. And to this day, I've taken that lesson from him. Don't prejudge situations and people.
Yes.
Because the people that you think you know and you trust are the ones that are going to disappoint you. So I have learned to keep an open mind all the time from him. And of course, you have to read and just be. So you were always on top of issues with him, because he says you have to use your mind.
Wow.
You have to listen, Mojanku. when you are dealing with conflict, you have to learn to listen. There are days when we would sit for 3 days with him just listening. I was reminding him that one time we went to Lesotho thinking we were going to be there just one day. We ended up there 3 days and we didn't have a change of clothes. So it became a challenge, like in the hotel at night, can you wash this shirt and you wear it again the next day? So, the patience is very, very patient. But also just, he's a child of Govan Mbeki and Epanet Mbeki, so very bright, very, very bright. Sometimes I say to him, to his own detriment.
We didn't understand him. I'm sorry to say, we really just didn't understand him. We just knew that we have a brilliant president whom we didn't understand. I suppose, when you are too bright, you sort of far from the average person.
Yeah.
And this is how we experience him. So let's just move then. I'm looking at a world that is changing right now. Politically, economically, socially. It looks very chaotic, right? And I worry because we don't know where this world is going to, where we're going to end up, right? And I go back to the changes of the 15th, 16th century when the world was drastically changing, where we saw the monarchs, even the church under challenge. We saw new economic systems where the feudal system was stopped and there was more equality and all of that. But we're the victims of that as Africa. We facilitated economic development in other countries as slaves, right? And I look at where Africa is today. And I don't know, maybe our leaders in their corners, they are strategizing as they see this change. I mean, the although it's still in a state of flux right now, but you can see it's big. Whatever it is big. And I wonder whether we're going to be ready this time as Africans. We're not going to be caught like we were caught back then when we ended up slaves. And I don't want a situation where we are caught like that. But I look at us, are we ready for this world in change? When you look at Africa, when you look at our political leadership, when you look at, where we are economically compared to the world, and the struggles as nations that we're dealing with, we are so engrossed in these little struggles of ours when the world is changing. So because you play a big role still, in the continent, you still deal a lot with big issues of the continent that I may not even fully understand that you do. Just tell us, where are we? This fear of mine, of being caught again like we were, can you give me a reassurance of our readiness for a changing world that will not be victims again of a changing world?
Well, that's a big one. It needs a very big seer mentality. But as you say, we were not always victims as Africans. We had very sophisticated kingdoms. Mapumbugwe were trading with China way before anybody thought trade is possible. The Timbuktu manuscripts show science and astrology and everything. But we were organized around what I would call sort of homogeneous units, which are kingdoms at that time. And we excelled in the world as Africans. I'm talking as Africans. What is the science behind the pyramids? If you look at the oldest ones in Sudan, they are just the science, the engineering, and all of that is mind-boggling.
Yes.
At that time. So there was that disruption, you're right, of slavery, colonialism, and apartheid that disrupted our progression. And so you're asking, and then after that came the wave of the OAU. And their primary purpose was to defeat colonialism. And they did.
Yes.
They did. It took a long time, from Sudan, 57, and then Ghana, and then the rest of us up to South Africa. Yes, Western Sahara is still occupied by Morocco. So we've not really completed the decolonization and freedom. But with South Africa, at least at that time, it was clear that finally the OAU has achieved its purpose. So we had great kingdoms, and then we were disrupted by slavery. Then we had decolonization, which succeeded. And now, you are right, we have to be aware of the backlash towards that is coming, which results in the marginalization of Africa from global affairs and all of that. And I think the first thing I would say is that we must be aware. We need leaders who are aware of that,
yes.
of those ebbs and waves and ups and downs and all of that, to know that this is a period when there's going to be that backlash from the successes of because for instance, Mbeki's African Renaissance is a continuation of that decolonization, to say now we are free,
yes.
Let's rebuild ourselves. It was always going to attract a backlash. So the question you ask is whether we are ready to fight back against that backlash, whether we have analyzed it correctly, whether we have the right leadership to do that, whether we are not too absorbed by domestic issues such that we don't see the bigger strategic issues. To give you an honest answer, I don't think we are ready strategically to see that as that kind of moment. To see it as a project to again disrupt Africa.
Yes.
Because it has happened before. That's and whether this analysis is made to see that every time Africa really rises, there's that backlash to try and disrupt it. I don't know if our leaders are ready for that. From everything that I have read and heard about the discussions at the African Union, the decisions that are taken, I don't think we are sufficiently analytical, sufficiently appreciative of that, and I don't think we've got the right responses towards that. But we've got you sitting here and you can see it. I'm just saying that you are a representative of the African people. You may not be in authority in one way or another, but the ultimate authority is the authority of the people.
Yes.
And so the fact that you see it means that there are many others who see it like that. And the question is, what do we do as ordinary citizens to make sure that we analyze this fight back against, we're doing great things. After the South African freedom, the AU was formed because the African Union there was a transformation from the OAU to the AU.
Yes.
There were programs of African peer review mechanism where leaders said, as peers, let's talk to one another.
Yes.
To go to you to say, President Tshisekedi, no, we think what you're doing is not right. It's not in the interest of Africa, or President Museveni, or, And then you had the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, which was a clear economic program building on the Lagos plan of action. So we were moving in the right direction. And then all of a sudden, boom, you could see that, that momentum was just disrupted. There's a time when we used to go to the West, I'm talking about the global North political, with a plan to say you can no longer say, I have a France plan for Africa. I have a American plan for Africa. We used to say, no, we have our own plan.
Yes.
Here it is. We know what should happen to us and all of that. And that has been completely disrupted. And I sit here and I say to you, it's not coincidental. It's not accidental. People sit, Nonku, and plan.
To disrupt.
To disrupt, yeah. Because, you've seen the Americans have defined, the American administration has defined its national security interest as, owning the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah.
And one may say that maybe they've always felt that they need to do that, but they use different methods for that. There are those who would use NGOs, supporting NGOs and marches, and then there are those who just march in and do what they want. It's just methods,
Yes.
But this idea of a whole hemisphere belongs to us. You have to ask yourself, how do they define their national security interests like that? But at the same time, we have to understand that they may feel for the first time that there's a real threat to their then existing sort of dominance economically,
yes,
and militarily. So there may be a real threat. I don't know how they've identified it. I don't want to go into politics, whether they've looked at 1.4 billion people in China who have been lifted out of poverty,
yes,
who are strong economically and all of that, and have said our only way of survival is to own the Western Hemisphere. That's the only way we can stand up to China. I'm just saying that maybe that's their calculation. So we have to understand the reasons why they think that they need a bigger America to fight something that they see as a serious threat to the existing America. But as Africans, we really have to define our place there. We have a whole continent which possibly is going to have the largest population size very soon.
Yes.
In the next 15 to 20 years because of our youth dividend.
Yes.
What does, what does that mean? What are we going to do about that? But the short answer is that I hope that just like you are thinking about it, there are some people in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Egypt, in Sudan, Somalia, who are seriously thinking about it. Maybe they've just not emerged as an organized group, but I hope that they are. But listening to our leaders at the OAU summit, AU summit or SADC or what, I don't think there's enough of that. Let me put it that way.
Yes. For me, that is, we've spoken about the threat of the world, but we are also not looking at these opportunities. There's a big problem in the West of, old population of old people. So women in the West are refusing to even give birth. So that problem is not going to be solved very quickly. And we all talk about this opportunity of, Africa. And I look at us, and we are not deliberate in developing this youth so that it can be ready to run the world, really. If we've developed our own human resources such that, everyone else, they don't have leaders because everyone is old or whatever, who are ready for that opportunity when it comes. So you're talking about China, who are mindful and strategic about lifting up their people and their own economic development. I suppose from those experiences of colonialism, they came out with a determination that never again, this thing will never happen to us again. And listening to us as Africans, we are always just complaining about this past, in spite of the successes in decolonizing Africa. But we are so stuck in that past. We've allowed it to define us, which is why I think we're not even able to work together as nations to just strategize. At least Europe is, although they may be a threat, they are, very mindful, and they are working together to strategize against this threat also to them. So we are right to say, what are we doing as citizens? Maybe our leaders are preoccupied with domestic issues and things like that. But what are we doing as Africans? And I always then wonder, what is the problem then with us? What have you identified to be the problem with us as Africans generally?
I don't think we have unique challenges. Europe has been at war so many times, the First World War, the Second World War, our parents were died, in the Mendi and all of that. So it's not that far removed from us. I think we shouldn't be too critical of ourselves as Africans. I think that there are things that we could have avoided as Africans. But I think the key challenge that I see is that unless you are able to really stand on your own 2 feet, as individual countries, even if it's not the whole of the continent, but if you have 10 countries that are doing well politically, economically, and all of that, and can come together, they will be able to lift the others. If you look at just the question of access to electricity, and you look at Inga Dam in Congo, DRC, that dam can provide electricity to all of Africa for the next 100 years, and it's hydro electricity. It's got the capacity to do that. But, a friend of mine said to me, it's a great asset in the wrong country. So I'm like, no, you can't say that. It's in an African country.
Yes.
And we need the leadership that will understand that this is an asset for all of Africa. And just stop playing games
Political
about
gains.
such an asset. Yes. Yes, but just like any other region, I mean, look at Russia and Ukraine. The difficulty there is the history. These are traditionally, Russian states that are now called part of Ukraine. The people there are Russian, their families are across the road and all of that. So here we also carry that burden of our history. If you look at Eastern Congo, it's always that the people who are there that came from both Uganda and Rwanda, but mainly from Uganda, Banyamulenge, that are in the Eastern Congo. There's always that conflict. Are they really Congolese or Rwandese and what? So it's the same thing. The eastern provinces of Ukraine, they see themselves as Russian. So it's not I'm just saying some of our problems are not uniquely African.
Okay.
And it's not like failing to find solutions is not a uniquely African issue. But I think that because of our youth, as I say, dividend and we've got everything on this continent. All the mineral, the hydropower, the youth, the knowledge. Timbuktu is a fountain of knowledge as a university. Some of the universities also, if you go to Sudan, the Durman, the university, the unbelievable Morocco, So we've got the elements. And I think that's why there's always an outside interference in African affairs, because the possibility, if we were just to wake up and say, what do we do with everything that we have? The possibilities are unlimited. So it had started. And I think that, as I said, with the AU, NEPAD and all that, it's not all lost. I think we're just going through a difficult period in terms of just the leadership that brings that together. I remember one of the lecturers at University of Johannesburg used to say we had a golden age, of the Meles Zenawi, Obasanjo, Mbeki, even Wade in Senegal, and and so Bouteflika. So you may find an emergence of that kind of leadership that says we have everything we need.
Yes.
We have everything we need and more. Only if we can get over our past. And I'm not that pessimistic, because I see it all over the world. The EU, the British walked out of the EU. Who would have thought? Because when you talk Europe, you used to think, and everyone thought, no, they won't vote for Brexit. They won't vote. And they did.
Yes.
So they also have many, many challenges. The US with Latin America right now, what happened in Venezuela. And then the countries around Venezuela are like, no, this is not going to happen. The US with Canada, so there are problems everywhere. But you are right that we have to take better responsibility as Africans for ourselves and look inside. And I think it's a question of leadership across the board, political, business, the church, women. NGOs, we must just take responsibility and do the right thing.
So I always worry about this whole issue of African identity, especially for us as South Africans, because I suppose apartheid had a deeper impact on us compared, for instance, to the rest of the continent. And for me, identity is everything. You can't find self-actualization if you are affected in terms of your own identity, your own culture, and who you are, right? If you don't know who you are, you can't reach your full potential in anything, right? So I always say that before 1652, we never saw ourselves as inferior or black, for instance. This whole thing of being black and whiteness came with the settlers when they came here. And in all that happened, yes, we fought a big fight. It's not like we handed over our country like that. Maybe later on, we're just tired of fighting and we suddenly started submitting. But don't you think that something was lost there? Because, I mean, as you're saying, what are we doing as people? And why are we not able to rise up and do something? Isn't this identity a big issue behind our inability to rebuild, for instance?
Well, I'm not sure about issues of identity pre-colonial times, how they manifested themselves. I mean, there are different writings about it, but if we limit it to South Africa, perhaps what you are saying is that the classifications that the colonialists brought onto South Africa were problematic. And then you are saying that, because colonialism was not just about domination in terms of resources and all of that. It also, was a project to eliminate what you call identity. Our identity, who we are, what our practices were, what we thought. It was meant to disrupt, as I said, that our own development, because we were developed people. People found people who could conduct proper agricultural things. I'm talking about South Africa now.
Yes.
Limiting it to South Africa. So it was a project of destroying that and destroying your identity above everything. I mean, in addition to other things. And I think
the divide and rule.
Yes, and I think the one of the people who spoke about that, but you were speaking to President Beki's President Bouteflika, who says, I had a team. I think he says he had a team in South Africa in the 90s from Algeria, just looking at the society here. And he realized that, because Algeria also had a long period of colonialism by the French. He says, I realized the difference between Algerian society and South African society is that in South Africa, the colonialists really succeeded in destroying, that sense of identity about who you are. And in Algeria, they also had the same project to destroy who we are, but we were protected by our religion. Because Islam goes hand in hand with cultural practices. And so, when they allow us to practice our religion, it had those protective elements around identity. But South Africa, basically he says they basically finished you guys off.
It's so true.
They were thorough because our religion was gone.
Mm-hmm. Our culture
was gone. Everything that we thought we were before was made negative. And you still see it to this day.
Yes.
That sense of negativity in how we look, how we talk, and all of that. I start somewhere, just if, to respond briefly, is that once you know that you are African, when people ask, how do you identify yourself, Mojanku? I say, I'm an African. It encompasses so many things, just that simple affirmation of saying I'm an African. It will not be complete Nonku. It will not be pure because of the disruptions that happened. But there are some basic elements that define who you are as an African. You know, a sense of respect for elders comes with our culture. You know, you don't have our children saying, "Oh, mommy, you are stupid." You know, there are some children who do that, but we know that it's an aberration. That's not what should happen. You know, our relationship with the departed, you know, ancestors and all that, it goes across. And then our customs around marriage go across the continent. You know, there are certain elements that just define who we are and are still there. And I think we can build on those, and people feel them. People who come from outside are like, "Oh my God, you guys are different." And we are different. You find it even amongst African Americans, you know, the way they conduct their weddings and, you know, jump in the broom. And there are certain things that just defines them as Africans still. And so let's start there to say, at least you and I know that we are Africans and are proud of that.
I want to move now to this issue of inequality, gender and race. Again, I have this worry that, you know, we're making good progress, I think, around race and gender in the world, really. And there was a sort of a time of consciousness around we have to deal with this whole issue of racism and sexism and all of that. And movements, you know, started with the Black Lives Matter, Me Too movement and things like that. And you can see now the rhetoric that is coming, especially from places like America, that this backlash that you talk about. And I suppose because it means that we were making real serious ground for people to feel that threatened, because the backlash is almost even, you know, violent in terms of its rhetoric, right? You can see that people want to dial back everything that has been achieved. And you can see, you know, corporations that were really making great progress around race and gender, dialing back, you know, going back to old ways. And I again worry about what is our response then as Black people and as women to this backlash, because when we go back to that social change of the 16th century and all of that, there were people who were actively engaged to end feudalism, to end the monarch system, to, you know, but do we have active people? Yes, we talk about this gender and race issue in our little corners and all of that. But is there a serious movement to make sure that we don't disseminate everything that has been accomplished so far? And again, I always go back to what should we be doing as people? Because we're still trying to find our identity, as we're saying, you know, that was lost through, you know, slavery and apartheid and all of that. How do we wake up to who we are? Because I always believe that once you find yourself, you can deal with anything, you know. So what is your sense about these changes that are happening in terms of equality?
I think there is no way that you can unscramble the egg. That's what I think. So there's no way that you can stop the movement for gender and racial equality. That's not going to happen. So yes, it will also get, you know, challenged from time to time. But I think what is happening now, you know, with like this year or last year was 30 years since we went to Beijing. Mm-hmm. And that conference changed, you know, shifted the the world a bit around gender equality, not a bit, but quite a lot. I know I always debate with Nkosazana Zuma about China's, because Beijing hosted us. You know, we're all there. So I'm like, China is doing so well in terms of everything, but I want to see more women in power. And she says to me, but the fact that China has lifted millions out of poverty is gender empowering, which is true. I'm saying the two are not contradictory, but I would like to see a little more women. When you see a Chinese delegation anywhere, it's a little, the note taker would maybe a woman, but mostly it's mainly men. And as our host for Beijing, I think they should lead the world in showing gender equality in authority. That's just my view. But I think that with the celebration last year of 30 years of Beijing, both in the UN, at the CSW, and different countries. For instance, we, all of us, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi convened us as the veterans of Beijing. We were very young, all of us then, but we've started deliberately evaluating how far we are and all of that. So it's an Africa-wide movement.
Oh, wow. The
African Women Organization met for the first time after a long time last year. And so that is not going to stop. It may not be the first item in the news, but it's not going to stop. On the anti-racism movement, as you've mentioned, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, and all of that. And this year, in October or November, I don't know the dates very well, there will be a conference in South Africa that, recognizes and celebrates some of the first Pan-African conference, where Du Bois was and Nkrumah and all of that.
Okay.
It's going to be held here. And it is led by the anti-racism movement global.
Oh, wow.
The World Council of Churches. Reverend Chikane is a co-host here in South Africa, and then Reverend Angeline Walker is an African-American in the US. They are the co-conveners, the two of them. And so people are going to retrace the slavery route. Some are coming from the US, from Europe. It's from across the world. They're coming to South Africa this year. And they're going to retrace the routes, the slavery route. Some will come through Gore, through the Gold Coast in Ghana, and all of the Mozambique and all of that. So that movement with the World Council of Churches behind it, and the Association of People of African Descent in the UN, all organizations. So that's why I say it's happening. Maybe it's not in the headlines because of the conflicts in the world. Every day Gaza occupies our minds, correctly so. Ukraine and Russia, the US. The US has got a leader who sort of dominates headlines every day. And so maybe it's not in the headlines as much as it should be, but that movement is very strong. Those of us who are part of it know and can see what it is doing. So I that's why I say that there will be backlash, Nonku, on anything. But you are not going to stop the world changing for the good of humanity. We know what it takes to create a better world. And I don't think anybody is going to stop that. There may be 10 years of regression or 5 years but nobody is going to stop that integration and that creation of a better world. Nobody.
Well, that gives me comfort. We've come to the end of the interview. Maybe you just your closing remarks on the subject. What is on your mind about all of these issues?
Well, I worry about my country, South Africa, quite a lot. It keeps me awake at night. I think we can do better. I think I think we must pay attention to all these things, all the negativity that comes out. We have to pay attention to youth unemployment. We have to pay attention to corruption. We have to pay attention to drug abuse in a real sense, And I worry that people who have the power to do something seem to be very, approaching it in a very relaxed way. And I don't want us to be caught into that trap, where it's going to be more difficult to turn it around. So I appreciate what you are doing, but I would like more people. You should also encourage more people to just stand up and pay attention to this country and then our continent as well.
Yes.
And but I'm hopeful that with a few people standing up and agitating, we'll get it right.
Thank you so much, Mojanku. I mean, there's so much that came out of this interview that gives me hope as well. And so thank you very much for availing yourself and making time.
Thank you for inviting me.